Greetings and welcome. I have a guest today, Ceresta, who's been notorious for making a great and impactful video for the Alita community. The topic that he proposed in his video was Alita Battle Angel does not need a sequel. I have him on here today to speak about that topic and a few extras. I would like to introduce my guest, Ceresta. Welcome.
Hello, Alita Lore. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah. I thought your video that you came out with was really great, and I had to ask the opportunity to do a little extra interview to go into more in-depth topics for a couple of the points you brought up. Before we do that, let's let it be known to any viewers that there's going to be a lot of spoilers for the movie and the manga, and we're going to be going into a lot of depth. So if you don't want to be spoiled, then read the series and watch the movie, then tune back in. So overall, the premise of the interview that we're going to try to highlight and talk a bit more in depth is Disney. Does the movie series, does it deserve to have a series, or is it as good as it is as a standalone video or movie? The first question I wanted to ask you was, if the movie was greenlighted for a sequel, what story arcs would be the most able to be salvaged to make the best sequel, such as the Zapan arc, finishing off Motorball? Would they go to the Badlands, or do you think they would skip most of it and go to Zalem to continue? Do you have any ideas on any of those topics?
Right. So I think that my approach would be kind of the most boring. Like, I just say, we'll just do what the manga does. But I mean that sincerely. Frankly, I think in the same way that the movie, this first movie, just sort of combined the first two arcs of the Grewishka arc and then Hugo. It sort of combined those two arcs together. I honestly think it would be fitting if they combined the Zapan arc with the Motorball arc, and then kind of ended it at the point right before the Badlands arc, and just sort of kind of do it the way they did it before, but this time I would sort of narrow down the focus and really bring out the character drama for Zapan. I think that would be the best way to go.
I like that. So that would probably be introducing characters like Sarah, and also hashing out the character McTeague from the movie a little bit more as well.
Oh, absolutely. You can't, like, from a storytelling standpoint, there's just so many juicy things that you can dig your teeth into for a storyteller, and like especially McTeague, the tragedy of his daughter, and Zapan and his downward spiral, and how it all just goes way out of control. There's just so much to go there. The script practically writes itself.
Totally. I could see that in my own head, and I like that idea. It would be something along the lines of Alita continuing her Motorball series, and interacting and meeting other characters like Ajakudi, Jashugan, Shimura, those characters, and maybe add the side plot cutting to Zapan and his story arc as well.
Right. And I also think it would be a great way to explore Ito, because weaved throughout those two particular arcs is how Ito plays a role in it, and that would lead to that great shocking moment when Alita goes to chase after Ito and meets Nova, where they have a very telling confrontation. I think that including Ito as a central character throughout those arcs, leading up to that like huge shocker, would be devastating and very important too.
Totally. I noticed in the movie, Ito was kind of a replacement character, or was a supporting character in Alita's Motorball journey, whereas in the manga, he was more of a conflicting character, where he sided with Jashugan instead of Alita. He kind of took on the role more of Ed and Umba as a pit crew worker. How do you think that would play out for the series?
So I don't think necessarily it would indicate that he has to be like the pit worker for Alita. They actually, in the movie, they mentioned how in Ito's backstory, like before his daughter was killed, he worked as a technician for the Motorball arena. So I think it makes sense that he would be the one to help, give her wheels and give her the thumbs up in the first movie, which if they really decided to, include Ito the way he's managed in the second arc, that it was already kind of understood that he has plenty of experience in that arena, and he could still, like, take on the role with Jashugan.
Okay, I like that. An idea that came across my mind when I was thinking about Ed and Umba and Ito taking over that role was Ed had a very tragic story where, he helped out Alita, acted almost as a father figure, taught her about the Damascus blade, and ultimately he died. And simultaneously, Ito was offed around the same time by Nova. I was wondering if there would be any predictions whether you think Ito's going to make it to the third movie if there was a trilogy.
Right. Well, and again, because the only reference that we have is the comics, because Ito, his arc kind of ended in that river city, or that coastal town that Alita runs into, like 10 years after her journey through the Badlands, where his memory has been wiped. The arc leading up to that moment, like, he was pretty much absent for a lot of it, and that was kind of like the end of his involvement. I don't know if they'd be comfortable leaving it like that, just dropping him cold, and it was a great device, I feel, for like alluding to the great terrible secret of Zalem, or Teferis if you prefer. And I don't know, it's really up to the people writing the script and how much they want to deviate and how much they want to keep it straight.
That makes sense. So we just talked a bit about the Zapan arc and Motorball arc. What do you think about the Badlands arc? How well do you think that would fit into, maybe even not the next movie, but if it was a trilogy, or if the series continued beyond that? Is it a bit too much of a Mad Max remake, or do you think it would have a good place to fit in?
Well, would it be too much? Honestly, I think they should go full ham. Personally, if they really want to go for a trilogy, which, in theory, I fully support that. I don't think that they would benefit from breaking up the Badlands arc into two chunks. I think when you read, because the first movie is based on 2 books, I think that they should combine the next 2 arcs, which was stretched across 3 books, but then the rest of it is kind of the rest of the series. That's like 5 books. But honestly, I think they could trim out enough and like condense that down into like a kind of a long, just basically the arc which begins like 10 years after Alita leaves Iron City and ends with confrontation with Nova, which covers like a huge time span. I think they could really make that work, and honestly, I mean, it's no secret that it was absolutely inspired by Mad Max, and I think instead of trying to lean away from that, they should just totally go for it. Just go wild.
I would love to see that, especially the henge cannon that they introduced in the manga. That is very impressive. I would love to see.
Yeah, if you're gonna go for it, go for it.
Right. Otherwise, the one more question about the story arcs there would be for Zalem. Do you think that they would be able to introduce the primary story that happened in the manga, considering the brain biochips didn't seem to be a big topic in the movie? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I mean that's a really difficult one, because I mean, as I covered, to those who may not have watched my video, I kind of cover this, how they show Sharen's brain in the jar going up to Zalem, but the problem was she was a Zalemite. She should not have a organic brain. If she was an adult, she had the symbol on her forehead representing that she had undergone the initiation. Either A, they're gonna have to like kind of go back on that moment in the movie, or they're gonna have to come up with something completely different, which that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but it's kind of one of the most important elements of the story, and when you've already kind of veered away from that so heavily, it only leaves you wondering, well, what are they going to do instead of that? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. It's a question that came to my mind building off of that is, are they even going to have a conflict? Because when Alita shows up, there's essentially been a mini civil war in Typhairs, and kids against adults, like they're having their own little struggle and then Alita shows up. Whereas the premise that the movie gives off is that everything is amazing up there, and because Nova's already up there, there's no reason to think that it isn't amazing.
Yeah, and that also leaves another question, because depending on the nature of the conflict, because they set up the entire movie leading up to like this confrontation with Nova, who they kind of propped up as like the big villain of the series, who is in control of Zalem. So are they really gonna follow through with the story in the manga where he wasn't really in control? He was just sort of allowed to do whatever he wanted because he was insane, but he got results. But then he was kicked out, and then once they realized what he knew, they started chasing after him and sent Alita. But if they're gonna prop him up as kind of the ruler of Zalem, then how are they going to manage all that? How are they going to... It's kind of, as I brought up before, it's really hard to figure out like what direction they're going to go from here. I mean, imagine if they remade Fellowship of the Rings and at the end they said, oh, by the way, the ring isn't evil, bye, end credits. What? Where would they even take it after that? It's really hard to predict.
Yeah, the build-up seems to be streamlining Nova to be generally a cliche bad guy, kind of like they did with Grewishka. It's very different than what the manga portrayed for the characters, who I call all of them to... I kind of believe they were all in a kind of a gray zone, as in everyone they might have done some bad things, they also might try to do good things, but given the world and the circumstances that everyone was existing in there, it was really very difficult for anyone to be truly good.
Yeah. And if I have to like criticize the film, like actually criticize it, I didn't get into it much with my little thingamajig video, I guess. Everything up to the end, as far as Nova goes, didn't bother me too much. What really bothered me is when he basically killed Hugo. Because here's the thing about Nova. Nova refuses to kill people. Yeah. In fact, if anything, his worst crimes is that he refuses to let them die. Yep, 100%. After he experiments on them, so that he would just callously take a life. I mean, his whole thing is about karma, so that's kind of the worst thing he could do. I don't know. I think there was some serious miscommunication on the script end, because there's James Cameron, who, what his introduction to Alita wasn't the manga, it was the OVA. So he, I'm sure he went back and read the manga, but it seems to me that there was like his script, his like monster original script that he couldn't wield, was mostly based in the OVA, and Rodriguez came by later and condensed it. But then again, like, there's almost that question, did Rodriguez read the manga, or did he just take on the task of condensing James Cameron's script? So there's like multiple layers of distance between the output and the source material. And I don't know, so many decisions were made that kind of contradict the source material, like, pretty strongly. And that's one thing about Nova that I'm very baffled about. And I'm sure they could find a way to make it interesting, but at this point we're just going, what? Right.
Yeah, going back to what you said earlier about Nova not wanting to ever kill people, or his, he'll do some very horrific scientific experiments on people, but at the end of the day he won't let them die. And a lot of people might question, oh well, he seems pretty evil in the manga, because Alita stumbles across one of his laboratories where he has all of his victims that they're in very strange predicaments, like where they can't die, and they say, oh please kill me, put me out of my misery kind of idea. So Alita gets the impression that they were quite evil. But something that always came up in my mind was Nova was willing to find people such as Jashugan, who his brain was pretty much destroyed from an accident, and he'd ask him, well, what do you want? What do you desire? And he would try to fulfill that. And then he also did the same thing with Zapan. He also did the same thing with Grewishka, or Makaku. And yes, his intent was to be very neutral about it. Like, what do you desire? What can I do to help you? And my thought process has always been, what if the vast majority of those people that were in that room that Alita stumbled upon were people that he tried to save, but upon them gaining their consciousness, instead of saying, I want to live again, or I want my life back, they said, please kill me. Like,
yeah. And the fascinating thing is when you think about, like, Alita as a protagonist versus Nova, the antagonist. In the manga, like, when Alita runs into Nova for the first time, near the end of the Zapan arc, she meets him, like, in his, like, little outpost, and when they meet, she has no idea who this guy even is, and he hands her Ito's head in a box, and she freaks out and kills everybody, only he uses his, like, nanotechnology to bring himself back. And then it's made clear, Nova didn't kill Ito. So there's almost like this, are you a villain, are you not? And then, so, later she's sent after him, and yeah, you're right, like, she chases after him for like 10 years, but she doesn't even think of him as a bad person or a villain until she finds that room, and even then, like, that's kind of all she has to go on. Right.
Exactly. Oh, go ahead.
No, that was my point.
No.
That was all I could say.
No, but yeah, exactly. Like, that's kind of what I was getting at as well, was, what was the actual context of the individuals that were in that room? Yes, they were experimented on by Nova, but they could also be people that, just like Zapan, where Zapan was revived from just a little piece of a brain fragment that was scraped out of a gutter. And, like, where did they come from? Like, it's possible that they were random people picked off the street, or it's also possible that they were people that he saved from imminent death, and maybe their minds haven't come back to normal yet, or, the technology, their request for certain things was beyond Nova's current ability to give them, so they're in waiting until then. Like, it's really hard to say, but yeah, the perceived notion that Alita got right away was, oh, these people are suffering, and they're in Nova's lab, therefore Nova caused the suffering. But that might not be the case. So that's always been a very interesting concept that the manga really makes the readers think about.
Yeah. In my video, when I talk about Nova, I use the term trickster god, and I meant that expression very deliberately, because, like, in mythology, like, trickster gods, or trickster, like, deities, they're very neutral, but they like to get involved indirectly. And with Nova, he has all these capabilities, and basically he just wants to stir the pot. He is fascinated with characters who he determines to have high
karma
potential. Like, if they were given the power, or if they had one wish fulfilled, they could cause so much change in the world, and he's fascinated by that process. I actually, like, despite being the quote-unquote antagonist, he actually has one of my favorite lines in all of fiction. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but I spit on Newton's second law, which is, of entropy.
Oh, okay.
He's trying to defy the universe on kind of like a large existential scale, whereas Alita is kind of fighting nihilism on her own personal level. Nova actually has, like, a very similar goal in his mind, but he's not trying to do it for himself, he's trying to do it for the universe, and that's such a strange and fascinating motivation for someone in his position. But if also bear in mind, he's basically mechanically immortal, and he has all these capabilities. What would you do if you had that kind of power?
That's a good point. Yeah.
And he's such a fascinating character.
I think that philosophy that he has, that you were just describing, is probably one of the big reasons why he's so fascinated with Alita, because she has the potential to make such drastic changes, and so his option, or his goal, is to say, how can I enable this? Like, and exactly. He'll even go to the lengths of giving her, like, the Imaginos body, and his only caveat is, please don't kill me. Like, I'm just like, oh.
Yeah, and yeah, that's just such a fascinating thing. Oh, by the way, you spent 10 years hunting me down, and then you finally killed me. oh, by the way, I resurrected you and gave you this insane nanotech body that I designed myself. Have fun.
Yeah.
Like, that's just great character moments.
Right, so these are the types of characters I would really want to see. This type of character dynamic and personality and motivations, this is what I would love to see in a sequel, instead of just a generic villain, like bad guy A, bad guy B, like,
yeah,
kind of what I've seen so far.
And I don't want to like backtrack any of the things that I said about the movie, because I feel like my points are still valid to an extent. But I have something to say about Rodriguez as a director.
Mm-hmm.
He's very shallow. And I mean that with all the affection in the world. What I mean is he's hyper practical. He has a script. He'll just, shoot one out. He'll go over it. He'll make sure that it's functional, and he'll get everything together. He'll get the actors together, and all of his characters are super, like, one note. But he gets in, he takes his shots, he gets out, he edits it, and he ships it out the door, and what you get as a result are these hyper simplistic but very entertaining, they almost feel like short films, Rodriguez. And that's amazing. Like, he's a great director, but I think that's kind of his problem when it comes to handling this sort of material, because there is a sort of meticulousness, a sort of, like, you have to kind of slow down and let it breathe kind of storytelling that Rodriguez, I don't think he feels particularly comfortable with. There's a lot, like, in the manga has a lot of, like, hyper internalized, hyper, like, reflective moments for these characters. Very much like just being in the characters' heads for a really long time, and, like, kind of focusing in on, like, critical details and, exploring them and extrapolating them and finding ways to tell the story through those details. And I just don't think that Rodriguez has a mind for that kind of storytelling. I personally think that while he did a great job, I feel like a different director could have, narrowed in on some of those, like, finer details and kind of drew the characters out a little bit better.
Totally, yeah, I like that take. I don't know a whole lot about directors in general, but I've heard some of those similar things about Rodriguez from another YouTube video of someone who was interviewing one of the producers who was part of Alita, and that person was describing Robert Rodriguez a little bit as, they see what they want to get done, they'll do it on the first take, and then move on to the next scene. And it gives a lot of creative freedom to the people that are in the role to, interact with the characters as they see fit. And that can be really great for most movies, especially for the comfort of the cast and, letting the movie just play out in a very organic way. But at the same time, that could be a downside if you're trying to really capture the magic of what Yukito Kishiro presented with the themes. So that's a really interesting idea that you brought up. Yeah,
I mean, don't get me wrong, like, even Kishiro himself said that, like, Machete is one of his favorite movies. So, I don't know if you've seen that, but if you have, then you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I've seen that movie.
Yeah. And that's the thing about Alita, so there's definitely a lot of Rodriguez DNA in there, but it's also, like, it's part Machete, but then there are parts that are, like, that are, like, hyper reflective and, like, stop and, like, turn into, like, introspection and, like, analysis of, like, real world science and extrapolating it, and that kind of shows, like, the sort of, like, variety in Kishiro's writing style. And honestly, I don't know many American directors who could do all of those things as well as Kishiro does.
Yeah, I don't know directors well enough to hazard a guess there, but yeah.
So I will say, like, when they announce a sequel, if they, we're making a new Alita movie, I'll be like, alright, fine. If they say Guillermo del Toro, never mind. I'm deleting my video off the channel and throwing away my computer. I'm sold.
He has a good eye for that kind of that type of cinematography.
Yeah, he's quite a character.
Very cool. Nice. So, I was going to ask a couple more questions about comparing characters, motivations, and themes between the movie and the manga, and try to see if we could figure out why these changes from the manga to the movie might not be as ideal for a sequel. And one of the first topics would be something like Nova seems to be in control of Zalem or Typhers instead of what was traditionally done by Melchizedek, the supercomputer. Do you think having the computer, or having Nova there instead of Melchizedek, would impact anything for a sequel, or does it take away from the current movie?
So that's interesting. Melchizedek's role in the story honestly doesn't really enter the foreground until way later. Like, it honestly doesn't even become like a real character until Last Order. I think they could complete a trilogy without even addressing Melchizedek. I mean, they could...
Okay.
Like, I think personally they could just mention it, like, assuming that they still want to go for the initiation reveal, and say, where do the brains go? And Nova could smirk and say something like, have you ever heard of the supercomputer Melchizedek? No, I'm sure you haven't. And just leave it at that. They could end the trilogy, and that will be the only indication. And, oh, what's Melchizedek? Oh, just have to read the manga, or greenlight, new movie, who knows? But again, that will just lead to the question of, are the filmmakers going to keep those elements of the story, or are they going to try something new? And it just depends on the role that Nova plays. I honestly, at this point, could only suggest either A, they'll stick with the source material, or they'll try something new, at which, I can't even hazard a guess at this point.
That makes sense. So another question would be, I know you brought this up a little bit in your video, but I figured we can go into a little bit more detail on it, which would be Hugo's motivation to get to Typhers, or Zalem, and what the differences are in his character and how his character came through on the screen. This might not specifically portray to a sequel, since we all know that he dies at the end of the movie, but things like his brother wasn't introduced. Clive Lee of the White Hot Palm was introduced in the movie as just like a one-shot, this is Clive Lee, I killed a lot of people, and then they moved on right away.
Yeah.
But how do you think Hugo's motivation to get to Typhers was either well done or not as well done for the movie?
Yeah, I have to say, like, the way they handled Hugo, I feel, is the weakest part of the movie in general, and it's simply because we never got that moment where we understood why he even wanted it. Like,
yeah.
The scene where, like, there's basically only one scene in the movie where we hear anything about his motivations, like, because throughout the movie we just know he wants to go up there, but there's only one scene where he indicates why, and it's this little offhand remark where they're up on the roof, and Alita says something, I don't know, the city doesn't seem so bad, and he says that it's just dirty, or something like that. It's like an offhand remark.
Yeah,
and
I know that scene.
There's literally nothing else for us in the audience to go like, but why? Why does this matter so much to him? And I get it. You could like introduce a character and just say, well, this is what he's obsessed with. Well, that's fine. But then if you're going to kill him off tragically in this big bombastic, emotional climax where his soul has been destroyed down to its roots, the reason why he wanted it in the first place is kind of the most important ingredient in storytelling. And leaving out that little bit of character drama where he's just talking about, well, when I was a kid, and then tells the story about, like, when he was, a child, and his brother was the one who wanted to go up, and he inspired him, and then, his backstory went the way it did, and then he kind of, once he realized that there was an opportunity for him to go to the city in the sky, he basically kind of followed through on his brother's legacy, and that was this sort of, for me at least, kind of this emotional linchpin, like connecting me to this character in terms of like, okay, I get that. I feel that.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes, like, his death that much more devastating. The movie, and again, this kind of goes back to my theory about the levels or layers of disconnect between the source material and Rodriguez's final script. I think Rodriguez was so set on using shorthand to sort of, like, abbreviate Hugo's story that, like, there's, like, it's very surface level, and that's kind of what I meant with Rodriguez being kind of shallow. I think he was just so quick to, like, Hugo as a character who, like, motivates Alita, and, like, he does these things, let's just kind of trim it down so that it's, like, compact and, like, bite-sized and fits in the movie. And on the surface, that's all fine. But then when you finally hit that moment where you're supposed to care about this character, or at the very least sympathize with him, and you don't because you just kind of failed to plant the seeds of empathy. And that's kind of where the movie falls apart, to me. It doesn't ruin the movie, it just, that's the one element where, like, they kind of dropped the ball, and I don't even think they realized they did until far too late.
Yeah, I see that as well. You know, that scene when he's falling in the movie, it's a lot less impactful because you haven't seen that build-up from that the manga has. In the manga, you almost bond with Hugo. You feel the struggle with him. You see his character as like, oh, you're a little bit gullible. You have like a type of innocence about you that makes you really sympathize with him, as well as all the hardships that he comes across. Whereas in the movie, it kind of just is like, I want to go up there, and you're like, oh, yeah. All right.
and the other thing too is that Hugo was a very, like, he had problems. He's a kid. He's a weakling. He's kind of an idiot, straight up. He's basically just kind of like a bratty punk, but he's also obsessed, and that's sort of his drive. And on the surface level, that just sounds like, you know, a very unlikable character, and, you know, certainly to an extent he is. But once you, like, learn where he's coming from, then that kind of, like, annoyance turns to a sort of human empathy. Like, totally. I don't like you, but I respect what you want and why you want it. Totally. And that's where that human... It's not about, like, agreeing with them, but, like, feeling what they feel. You know, that's, you know, empathy. It's very human.
Yeah. Going
Rodriguez, I feel, exchanged that for trying to turn him into this sort of, like, Disney movie hunk. He's so sexy.
The bad boy.
And he's a bad boy.
Exactly.
And unintentionally made him unlikable, but, like, in the wrong way.
Totally.
So they sort of traded empathy for, like, a shallow likability, which ended up kind of hurting the character. And that's why a lot of people who criticize the film, one of the first things they say is, oh, Hugo, I hated Hugo. He was awful. Get him out of the movie. You could have taken him out and the movie would have been better. Like, I kind of understand where they're coming from, because, you know, I don't have to elaborate.
Totally. Going off of the word that you used earlier, that Hugo, in the manga at least, had this kind of obsession with getting to TIE fairs, and his work ethic really became a hustler to make sure that that dream came true. A big part of that whole scenario was along the way, especially when he found his brother's hand, that was his introduction to meeting Vector. And then that relationship developed. It was very organic in a way, where Vector in the manga seemed to be trying to just help Hugo, saying like, oh, well, I'll give you a big aspiration, and even though it's unobtainable, it'll keep you working, it'll keep you hustling, and it'll keep your mind out of the gutters.
Yeah.
And then Hugo,
he was just, you know, he was just a shark, and he found a little fish, and, you know, it's a food chain, and it happened, like, in a way that's, like, very plausible and makes total sense.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, I almost feel like, in a small way, Vector, I'm not saying he was doing him a favor, but he was looking out for him along the way. You know, he was a contact that Hugo could communicate with for, you know, random help or assistance, and it kind of kept Hugo as a decently, you know, humane character. You know, he wasn't just jacking cyborg bodies. but he was also learning to repair structures because he worked for Ito. I'm sure he worked for other people as well. But he had this fanaticism with, I need to earn the chips and I need to get to TIE Fairs. And, you know, I assume that Vector probably thought, you know what, he'll get like, you know, a couple 100,000 chips and then he'll give up and then he'll just want to settle down and maybe I'll take him on board. And then, but the day Hugo showed up at Vector's doorstop with all the chips, he was like, oh shoot, I gotta, like, this is tough. I gotta break some news to you, and you know this is the worst timing to do it because you know you're being chased by the, you know, you're a fugitive. So
and I have to say, like, Mahershala Ali or whatever. Well, okay, I shouldn't bring the actor into this. This is all on a script level. You know, I think they did Vector fine enough in the movie, but they definitely kind of like all the other quote unquote villains. You know, they just oversimplified him because in the manga he was just sort of like an opportunist and a weasel who had connections. And I see what you're getting at, and I totally get it because, like, you know, he wasn't out to get Hugo. He was just like, well, here's an opportunity, and you know, like, you know, he shared a glass of whiskey with him. You know, he liked the kid, but you know, he was taking advantage of him, but it wasn't like malicious. He was just, you know, lying and, you know, getting what he wanted and also giving Hugo something to work for, and that's just, you know, that was just the game he was playing.
Totally, yeah. I mean, Vector, I don't think, to my knowledge, he never got the chips piece by piece. I think Hugo showed up with them all at once one day, and he's just like, what? That's 1 million chips? Oh my god, you actually did it. Like,
yeah, at which point he was forced to confess.
Yeah, so it's an interesting dilemma there. I had one more topic about Hugo, and this was actually something that someone in the Alita army had brought up in the past, that I heard them say this on a stream before, and it really kind of stuck with me. But Hugo in the movie had a really interesting scenario, specifically where he took the grind. He was responsible for taking the grind cutters, and then from the motorball player, and then he also realized when Grewishka showed up at the bar, trying to kill Alita specifically, he was using those very same grind cutters. And you know, you could see that in the movie. The character specifically looked at the grind cutters, and then he had that internal dialogue of, oh, that's where the grind cutters went that I harvested off of the motorball player. And yet he didn't seem to ever have this change of heart. Like, you know, he knows that those grind cutters went to Vector. It's not a mystery that Vector is now trying to kill his girlfriend, and yet he still uses Vector in the movie and relies on him. And it was an interesting point that was brought up. I was just curious if you had any thoughts on that.
No, yeah, like, well, I hadn't thought about that before, but now that you bring it up, that's kind of great storytelling, except there's one problem. They never let that moment breathe. And that's the thing about storytelling, is it's about pacing. You know, a horror movie that's just trying to rush from the beginning to the end, it's not going to be very scary because you never let the dread build up. Or like a mystery, if you just, you know, solve the mystery. Well, it wasn't much of a mystery if you just, like, here's the question, here's the answer, okay, we're done. It's about pacing. And in that case, like, they specifically could have, like, just taken half a second to show that Hugo was specifically looking at the grind cutters. Just give him that moment, and then, like, later, while Alita's being repaired, just, like, show Hugo, like, having a moment of reflection. You know, like, he's waiting for Alita in Ito's lobby his waiting room while Ito's working on her, and you could see, like, the guilt in his eyes, or like a fade-in flashback of, like, him seeing the grind cutters, and then play back the scene where he's removing the grind cutters. Just give him that moment. Just give the audience that moment, showing us where his turn of heart, or his change of heart, came from. Because later in the movie, when he comes, you know, the other members of the gang took down that guy, and he just shows up and says, no, I don't want to do it anymore. Where did that come from?
Right.
that didn't, like, in at least in the language of the story, that decision didn't come from anything. And, like, you're right. Like, it could have been this great, like, it could have been a great bridge between an event and a decision. Instead, it was just sort of like skipped over. For all we know, it was like in the script, but it was like lost in the editing process. Who knows?
Yeah. So yeah, the person who brought up that point, his name is Creek Indian. I really thought his take on it was very good. And I think he saw the movie before reading the manga, then after seeing the movie he decided to read it. But the take that he got from Hugo was, in the movie, he's just a little shit. What's wrong with this kid? You know, like, don't you see the error of your ways? And so that was just an interesting question. I wanted to get your take on that.
That's a really good point, but I hadn't thought about it before.
Yeah. So moving on to the next one is Koyomi was not a major character in the movie, whereas in the books she was probably like a B tier character, not the most prominent character, but she came back quite a few times. But in the movie she was aged quite a bit to pretty much the same age as Alita and Hugo. What do you think about that, and as far as how it would impact any sequel?
Yeah, so I think in the context of them wanting to make a trilogy, I think they aged her up specifically to avoid the so in the manga, like, I want to like do a quick side rail on her character real quick, because Koyomi is fascinating in terms of, like, when you have something huge like a comic book, you know, it's written over the course of like a decade and a half, you have time to like give life to certain characters who don't even necessarily impact the story, but they're there, kind of like Hamlet's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They're just side characters, you know, but they also exist for some reason. But there's almost like a kind of like a nice thread being weaved, and Koyomi to me always struck out as the thread that connects the story from beginning to end, like in her own weird little way. Because if we think about, like, she appears in the very first book as a baby.
Yep.
And in the next arc, she's a toddler, and she's very close to Alita, and Alita's like, you know, teaching her stuff, and then Alita has to go away. And then we fast forward 10 years, and she runs into her again in the desert, and then she joins Barjack's gang, and she was there during the attempt at the revolution, which fails, and she's like one of the only survivors. And then in the original ending of the series, the very first thing that we see when we skip forward however many years after Alita's, you know, sacrifice, is Koyomi.
Yep,
here she is.
Searching.
She's like a young adult, and she's got like a life, and like it's this thread, and there isn't really like a mechanic or like a device, or even it's something that's just pure art, something that can't be described with words. There is the kind of intrinsic meaning in showing the growth of a side character who it's like, well, I mean, I keep using the, you know, analogy of a thread, but that's the only way I can describe it, is it feels like something that was weaved into it. But that was a massive commitment made by Kishiro when he was writing all that. And I think that when these people writing the movie were like, well, Koyomi appears a lot, but there's like all these like time gaps, let's just sort of like condense that. Let's just simplify it and age her up into like, you know, a teenager, and we'll decide what to do with her character later. I don't know why exactly. I couldn't explain it. That's just kind of where my thoughts are at.
No, that's a really good idea that you put forward there. I hadn't even thought of it that way. She really does connect pretty much the whole series. Even going into Last Order, she continues into the series quite a bit as well.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, that's a really interesting point that you brought up. For me, I kind of thought she was mostly there just to be a placeholder for the sequel, that whenever they go into the Badlands. In the manga, she definitely had her situation where she joined the Barjack, and a lot of that was because she was kind of going against Alita. You know, she wanted to have her own personal, her own path that she chose.
Yeah.
And I would call it kind of rebellious, all things considered. But at the same time, I think the movie would use different motivations to have her go against Alita. So if they're the same age, You know, the fact that Alita's responsible for Hugo essentially dying, or, you know, and Tanji, or, you know, not directly, but it's very possible that she would make those insinuations, because a lot of Hugo's risk and reward and connection to Zapan hunting him at all was only because Alita kind of stirred the pot.
Right.
And
I hadn't thought about that. That's definitely one direction they could take it.
And then my second thought would be, if they did a sequel that involved Zapan, then, you know, if Zapan does end up destroying the city, which happened in the manga, the barkeep lost his bar for the third time. When Zapan...
I'm laughing. It's not funny.
Yeah, I feel bad for him.
Not the way it happens. No,
yeah.
No.
Right, and him and Shimura and baby Koyomi make it out of the rubble and have to start fresh again. In theory, if Koyomi is the same age as Alita and Zapan's arc does come to fruition and destroys the city, then Alita would be responsible for not completely ruining Koyomi's life, but definitely being something that Koyomi wouldn't have appreciated.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, that's a good point. She'd be old enough to actually blame her for what happened.
Essentially, yeah.
As opposed to just being sort of a child who was too young to understand what was happening at the time.
Right.
I can see that.
But ultimately, in the manga as well as the movie, I just predict that Koyomi's going to have to end up making her own choice and going the opposite path of Alita. And so they're setting her up to have different motivations for doing that. But
I will say, if they made that decision for that reason, I wouldn't have a problem with that. That's actually pretty clever. I'd say go for it.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. I mean, yeah, hey, maybe we'll give a one tally point to Alita might actually deserve a sequel.
Yeah.
But that's cool. So moving on would be Jashugan. In the movie, he was hinted at, and you know, you see him in about one or two very quick scenes. And based off the video that you put out, and you mentioned the concept of Chekhov's gun, I was wondering if Jashugan was kind of a failed attempt at a Chekhov's gun, where he was introduced,
yes.
And there's no...
That was absolutely... I get what they were going for, but it was pointless of them to try to plant that seed this early, because we don't care.
Right.
Who is this guy? He's the championship motorball leader, or whatever. Okay, I don't care.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the problem with the sequel baiting. When we think about franchises that started off just as a single film, those movies were not made with the intention of having sequels. With a few small examples, Lord of the Rings, whatever. But okay, actually, I was thinking about this very thing, and allow me to make a comparison with Lord of the Rings again, because Lord of the Rings kind of succeeds in a lot of the ways that Alita, the movie, kind of makes all these frustrating errors, and this was one of the things that I was thinking about, especially with the motorball and Jashugan. The Fellowship of the Ring is not a standalone film. It is absolutely the first film in a trilogy. It's based on source material that had already existed before, and everybody knew going in that it was meant to be the first movie in a trilogy. But here's the thing about Lord of the Rings. It sets up everything you need to know, and when the movie ends, the only threads that are left dangling are the ones that matter. We didn't hear anything about Rohan or about Gondor throughout, or it wasn't hinted at the end of Fellowship of the Ring. It was, in a way, even though it was the first chapter of a longer story, it was a tight, self-contained experience where the stakes are set from the very, very, very beginning. Alita is, in a way, far too aware that it's not a standalone film, and it suffers as a result. It's trying so hard to be a prequel to other movies that it doesn't give itself the chance to be its own film. Or I'm not going to condemn the movie on those grounds. I will just say it leans far too heavily in that direction, and the early introduction of Jashugan is just one of those like little artifacts of that mistake, because he's in there. They paid an actor to play the role for like a second. They got artists to design what he looks like. They spend screen time showing him off with absolutely no payoff. Totally. And we don't, like, in this completely meaningless character.
Yeah, I see that 100%.
If that makes any sense.
No, it does. I mean, that's kind of why I called him a Chekhov's gun. Or a failed Chekhov's gun, I should say.
In this case, like, Hugo would be an example of somebody being shot in the third act, but where did the gun come from? We don't know. Jashugan is an example of them showing us a gun, but then that's it. Nothing happens with it.
Yeah, the gun never came back.
It is unnecessary information, if that makes any sense.
Totally is, yeah. No, I agree with that. Personally, I wish that they either did something a lot bigger with Jashugan, or they just left him out entirely. But for example, I know they gave Alita a motorball, a little bit of time playing motorball, but her entire fight was against bounty hunters that were trying to kill her. So you didn't get an introduction to a lot of the characters, especially Jashugan, which my thought process was in the first, the earlier parts of the movie when you see him in the pit being worked on. My thought process was, ooh, they're going to show him off later on in the series, and he's probably going to kick Alita's ass because she hasn't overcome his character for quite a while, and she ultimately ends up looking up to him quite a bit for inspiration. But because they never came back to him at all, I'm kind of like, wait, where'd he go?
And it does raise the question, but that's the seed they're planting for the future. That isn't inherently a bad idea, and that's true. Something in my mind, for example, is what if there's like a quick cut, like a Tarantino-esque quick cut, just showing like Jashugan, in like a locker room, and like one of his pit buddies jokes about, hey, did you see that new recruit Alita? You think she's gonna make it past the semifinals? And Jashugan just kind of, laughs or scoffs at it and says, we'll see, whatever, or something like that. Just a tiny little bit of involvement in the immediate story, just enough to like throw us a bone, just give us something that validates his presence and the screen time he's taking up in this film.
Totally.
Like just give us something that connects him, as opposed to just, oh yeah, look over there, here's that guy, here's his name. Anyway, back to the story.
No worries. So I had one more question about comparing the characters' motivations and themes. And this one, it's about not a person, but the setting, which is comparing the Scrapyard versus Iron City. Things like the aesthetics, the safety, traveling in and out of the city, the importance of those viscous liquid walls that usually keep people in. These are things that I saw in Iron City, but I just felt that they were poorly portrayed. Seeing happy families walking around with kids, music, just generally upbeat stuff, and I'm comparing that to the manga, and I think to myself, well, man, this isn't what the manga's like at all.
And I want to give praise where it's due. The execution on like how well they handled their version of Iron City is stunning. It is magnificent work of like technical and artistic achievement, and absolute 10 out of 10 bravo to the people who brought it to life. I love Iron City in the movie. The problem is that it's Alita. It's based on the Alita comic books, where that is absolutely not the setting that people live in. And honestly, and I don't want to oversimplify it, but I literally just think it was a matter of the movie's rating. I think that the studio was like, all right, Cameron, you want to make this movie, but you know what? Let's play it safe. Let's make it PG-13.
That's actually that's my next question.
Yeah, all right, sure. But then the guy who's looking over the source material, who's reading the manga, is like, wow, that's pretty violent. But it's okay. All we have to do is just take out the violence and all the gore and the rape and the screaming and the death and the blood and the guts, and that's it. We'll just trim it down a bit and call it a day. And on paper, that seems like it would be enough. The problem is that the setting kind of informs everything. It would be like Midgar if Shinra weren't evil. You're kind of missing the point. You know, it would be like Mordor if it took place, you know, on a tropical island. You're missing the point. Totally.
Yeah.
It would be like Alien if it took place anywhere but the Nostromo. You're missing the point.
Exactly.
It is a dark and violent place, and it produces dark and violent people. And if it were actually like and it's almost it's not just like character motivations, it's plausibility too. Why would they need like peacekeepers, the hunter warriors? Why would they need hunter warriors who are so skilled and like have cybernetic augmentation if it's so darn peaceful?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
You throw these like these like augmented superpowered, you know, warriors in this like peaceful city, and I'm going, that's a little overkill. What's going on?
Uh-huh.
You throw them in, you know, Detroit from RoboCop, and I'll say, oh, okay, I get you.
Yeah.
You know, you throw them in, you know, Mega City from Judge Dredd, I'll go, are you kidding me? That's not enough. You need more of that. But in the movie, it's kind of, they changed a fundamental ingredient of the story without thinking about how it kind of calls the logic of the world into question.
Yeah, and one more point on that is Hugo's inspiration to even going to TIE fairs. You know, the fact that he wants to go there not only for his brother's dream, but for the idea that it's something much better up there. But I'm thinking, well, in the movie, this city that you're living in looks pretty comfortable. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
Why would you want to go? Like, there's no real reason for it other than just, you know, what, are you selfish?
Yeah, and another thing about it too is they could have, even if they had stuck exactly with the way it was, they could have spent a little bit more time kind of propping Zalem up, or Teferis up, and like giving it almost a mythical quality. Like actually, like people talking about it like it's literal heaven, like they're like God is up there, and like that is like a wonderful paradise beyond, you know, the scrapping, or the beyond, you know, the toil of our lowly lives down here.
Mm-hmm.
Just give it some kind of like mythical, otherworldly quality that makes it intrinsically alluring, and the audience will instantly go, okay, I get that. He's thinking about it like a promised land. It's a bit of a trope, but that's neat.
That's a really...
that would have been enough.
No, that's a really good point, because, you know, in the manga, there was a couple panels of people worshipping TIE fairs from the Scrapyard with their own little homemade shrines and, you know, prayers. So that is an actual theme that the manga brings up, is because the people in the Scrapyard don't really have such a good idea about what's up there. A lot of them just assume that it must be perfectly, like, literal heaven or paradise of some sort.
And that's another fascinating element, because humans, at least as portrayed by Kishiro, are like almost inherently spiritual and religious.
Mm-hmm.
But in the Scrapyard, there's like no like one like religion sort of binding people together as you would see in most worldly cultures. But rather they kind of turn to idols.
Oh yeah.
Whether it be like motorball champions, or in that case literally they worship Zalem or Teferis.
Mm-hmm.
Because to them that would actually make a lot of sense, because like in their world, you live down here on the dirt, you live off the refuse of this gigantic sparkling futuristic city in the sky, and they are the ones who tell you what is right and what is wrong. What better definition of a god do you need? And that alone would have been a great little device in the movie to just sort of like imbue to say to the audience, this is important, and people look up to it, not just literally but like metaphorically, and that would totally give us something to chew on as far as Hugo's motivation. Even if you made Iron City just as peaceful and nice looking as it was, elevating like Zalem's status or inherent mythical qualities to the audience would at least draw us towards a kind of understanding and even intrigue.
That's a really good point. Yeah, totally.
That's just only one way you could have handled it.
No, I think that would have been a lot better of a way of doing it. You know, I think the movie kind of just assumed, oh, well, everyone's doing good down here, but there's also up there in Zalem. That's also great, but yeah, that's about it. Like,
they've kind of failed to communicate the difference. Right,
exactly. So, moving on, I only have about 2 more questions to ask.
Oh, sure.
And these ones, the first one is about an R, which you actually touched on just briefly on this last question, about the R rating. And the first part of it is, why wouldn't a PG-13 rating be able to convey any of the meaningful messages compared to an R rating?
Right. This is, I had an argument with a friend about this because they're very conservative and they don't care for R-rated films, especially like violent ones. And I totally understand, but there's a kind of legit... Let me draw a point of comparison. I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole, but think about PG-13 violence. It's almost like a weird, glorified sort of violence, in that, like, imagine like the violence you see in Marvel. When the Hulk punches a dude, he goes flying.
Yeah, it's like a rag doll.
No blood, no broken bones. He goes flying, and it's almost comical. Yep. But the movie has to do that because if you think about how strong the Hulk really is, if he landed a blow on a normal human person, they would frigging explode.
Yeah.
Blood and gore and bones everywhere. Now, you could say, that's just gratuitous. But I say this. Is it gratuitous? Or does it rather demonstrate the actual consequences of exaggerated strength? It's no longer a cartoon, but it grounds what is happening in a sort of plausible reality, which gives it stakes. It makes it horrifying. And in my opinion, if I had to pick a panel out of Alita to demonstrate this concept, it would be during the Zapan arc, when Zapan has just been resurrected by Nova and given the Berserker body, and it goes haywire, and now he's looking for Alita. He's on, he's on his quest for vengeance, and the first place he goes to is the bar.
Oh, I know, he's going for Gonzu.
Yeah. And even then, he's not even going for him directly. He just walks in, and what's her face?
Shimura.
Shimura, yeah. Shimura just says, "Oh, hi, come right in." He reaches out for her, and the gentleman, by pure coincidence, just kind of go, "Oh, excuse me," and then walks in front of her on accident, or bumps into her, and he gets him first.
Yeah.
And it's just a small gesture with no weight or momentum behind it, and yet the next panel is Shimura being showered in the viscera of this once beloved character. No fanfare, no moment to even breathe.
Yeah,
but that character is
right
suddenly not only dead, but destroyed in this shocking, horrifying, visceral way that punches you in the gut. It's not like a clean, somber, hold you in my arms with your dying last words kind of death. It's a, no, you are paste now. That kind of visual, there's a language to it. There's a purpose behind it. It makes you afraid of violence. Compare that to a Marvel movie where, superheroes are punching each other around, and it's almost like a cartoon. And you're cheering them on. You're cheering for the violence.
Yeah.
In an R-rated Alita, you're not cheering. You're going, oh my god. Anytime a cyborg hits a thing, that thing dies. Real consequences, real weight.
That's an interesting way that you say that, because in the motorball fights, for example, for the movie, those all came off as very Marvel type fights where, everyone's getting beat up and trashed and some people even blow up, but you're essentially cheering for it, and you don't seem as though it doesn't seem as though there's any consequences behind those actions. You just assume, they'll be repaired.
Yeah, and another thing about like the concept of gore in this regard when it comes to violence, and yeah, there's like people out there who just like to watch people get ripped apart. Thank you, Saw movies. But there's a visceral reaction that happens when a person is consuming media and they see that kind of thing. And it kind of harkens back to what is the morality of the story from the author's point of view. And yeah, of course, there's a lot of interpretation, but when a storyteller shows something hyper-violent and it's meant to be laughed at or cheered at, you can feel that. But when it's meant to be something that's genuinely shocking and horrifying, like, we're not glorifying what we're seeing here. We're trying to make you afraid of it. And that's something that Alita does insanely well. It makes you afraid of violence, because when it happens, it matters. And that's kind of one of the things that's lost in the movie. When people get beat up, they're just beat up. And when people die, I wouldn't even call it shocking. Well, I don't know. I would need more time to, like, make my arguments here more eloquent. But I feel like an R rating would ground what is happening on screen on a level you couldn't really get away with PG-13, if that makes any sense.
Totally does.
Like sudden death portrayed in a way that makes you, like, sick to your stomach, that makes you think, I don't want to see this happen to a character I like, kind of thing. But the violence on screen is telling the audience, hey, this could happen to anyone at any time. Like a Tarantino film, or like a No Country for Old Men.
Totally.
A film that is not afraid to look right at the audience and say, hey, you like that character? Yeah, they're dead now.
Right. Because
that makes you squirm in your seat. That makes you care. That makes you think, holy crap, are they going to make it out of this? Because they might not.
Mm-hmm. No, that kind of anyway. That reminds me of with Ed, kind of early in the series, when he'd just gotten Alita's Damascus blade, and him and Alita had just gotten into an argument about her quitting the motorball just after she is being so successful. And, he's flipping out, and because he's kind of living his dream vicariously through her, because he used to be a motorball player himself. Then out of nowhere, even though they're arguing, a junkie just walks up with a pipe gun and blows his head off. And technically he was aiming for Alita, but Ed got in the way and blocked it and sacrificed himself. And the impact that had for Alita was very monumental. And now as a reader, when you hear that and you see that, you're like, wow, like this is a very, very brutal world, and anything can happen, and there's a lot of meaning behind it.
Yeah, and like a lesser author would do that just for shock value, but Koshiro is not a lesser author. Mm-hmm. And like I kind of spoke on it a bit, but like nihilism, and that just life doesn't matter, and random horrible things happen to good people all the time for no reason at all, is a rule of the universe, and it sets the tone for what Alita is going up against. Just random acts of shocking horror are kind of tied to the DNA of the story, and if they're too squeamish to like show that, then it's kind of, the story is going to suffer. And I fear that if they go forward with a PG-13 sequel, then they're just going to keep going down that path where violence isn't very impactful, and death is just sort of like it's not very shocking.
It's like a timeout.
Yeah, it's just like well, that sucks. Oh well, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that actually you kind of just led into the final question that I was hoping to ask, which is a perfect segue right there. How Alita in the manga battles with the meaningless suffering, yet always pushes forward, and what motivated her to continue each time she was brought down, and how do these messages resonate with the readers?
Yes. This is a fascinating topic. I've thought about this a lot. So this goes back to a very Nietzschean philosophy, which is nihilism. But so Nietzsche proposed that in a world without God, what you have is basically a world without any inherent meaning or real definitions, a world without morality, like a world without universal morality, rather. And it is basically up to humans to decide what the meaning is, to make meaning out of nothing. And it is not a large-scale journey, but rather a personal one towards something he called the Übermensch, which is German for literally superhuman. And what that means is, by pursuing the process of self-actuation, you eventually come to terms with all of like your flaws. You basically embrace everything about you, and you walk your own path, and then you start to impose your will on the world once you've figured yourself out. And this journey basically for Alita starts in the very beginning. You know, she has no memories. She literally has no idea who she even is. And as soon as it starts coming back to her, like through the Panzerkunst, like one of the very first things she has to deal with is she's way too violent and way too strong. There's actually, like during the Hugo arc, she realizes that she's capable of tearing Hugo to pieces if she's not careful with him. And she like she runs away and like takes a moment to like come to terms with that. And then later she has to come to terms with the fact that she kind of accidentally killed him, or indirectly. Yeah. That she through her actions has all these indirect consequences, and that realization and those effects are only amplified in the next arc with the whole Zapan arc and his revenge plot. And basically over the course of the story, she has to come to terms with her own flaws and her history, and it's only once she has figured all that out and come to terms with it and has embraced all of those dark things about herself that she finally kind of quite very much becomes an Übermensch. It's the process of basically becoming a superhuman. And that sort of theme is sort of woven in from the very opening chapters. And I especially love, we discussed this a bit when we were setting up this interview before, but during the Motorball arc, when Ed was talking about the Damascus blade, at this point Alita is kind of going through a very rebellious phase where she's just trying to hone her skills as a warrior through Motorball. And she says, I want to be pure steel, just honing my edge. And Ed brings up a fascinating counterpoint, warning her, you know, metals of high purity are actually quite brittle. Instead, be like Damascus. And this is when he kind of like explores, well, what is Damascus steel? Well, he explains, it's basically a metallurgy where you combine very impure metals, but through this refinement process, you have this crazy pattern of metal called Damascus, which can only be forged by masters. And when it's done, it uses those impurities to create this absurdly strong metal. And he was basically right then and there setting up the whole analogy, like the whole theme of all of Battle Angel Alita and her personal journey, because embracing your imperfections and using them and honing them and working out the kinks, but also at the same time embracing who you are, will lead to the ultimate you, to Übermensch. And I applaud Kishiro for keeping those threads going basically from the very beginning to the very end. And I don't know if they're gonna include that or go for it in the movie. But I feel like it's very important and it's worth exploring.
That was a really, really good point. You know, that a lot of that went over my head because, you know, I hadn't even heard of half of those words. But as far as the topic of the Damascus steel and its imperfections being part of its own strength, I think that's a theme, like you said, that carries, it does in the manga at least, carry Alita through so much. It would be very, in my opinion, important for themes such as that to continue into the movie. But I think so far in the movie, the closest thing that we got was the line from Daisuke Ito, who said, once she received the Berserker body, like something like, I forget the exact line, but good and evil isn't up to you specifically or something. It's what you do with it. Yeah, I'm sure.
It's just a body. It's not good or bad. That's up to you.
That's it. Yeah.
That's for you to decide. Yeah, that's right.
So in a way, I don't know if that's wholly in line with the saying that, for the Ubermensch, that whole theme, but I think that's kind of where the movie seems to have been going with it, which
I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt in that they were kind of thinking of what would be good shorthand for like kind of exploring that subject, and that one little line kind of says it all. And I do really like that line. I think that was a good job.
I thought it was a good line too. So.
And of course, Christoph Waltz's delivery is just always, on point.
All right. Yeah, he's a really good character. One of these, I would say we could do another whole question on his character and the changes to his demeanor, his age, all that stuff, but we'll save that for another time. But let's wrap up here. I want to thank you again, Ceresta, for joining me on the stream and giving me your input. I think the video that you came out with was amazing. I'll make sure I leave a link to it in the video description so other people can take a look at it. And I had a question for you personally, which is, do you have any other upcoming projects or videos that on your itinerary that you plan on coming out with? Give yourself a little plug.
I would love to plug myself, but honestly, my YouTube channel is just sort of like a place where I put random stuff. I don't really plan on doing more movie reviews at the moment. If you're looking for good movie reviews, there's plenty of amazing ones out there. Movies with Mikey, Red Letter Media, and I'm sure I could think of a couple others. For me personally, I had a lot of thoughts and things to say about Alita, and that's what I wanted to put there. I mostly just do random music stuff on YouTube. I make art on my Twitter. You'll see me post there sometimes. Ceresta Art, like spelled the way I have my username, but with ART at the end. If you want to check that out, go for it. But that's it.
Oh wow! Well, hey, that's good. It sounds like you have social medias are full of surprises. You have music, art, movie reviews. That'd be fun to check out. Otherwise,
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for coming on, and appreciate you giving me your time today.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, you have a great one. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, you too. Take care.